going through this forced march to try to come up with some things that you might be interested in terms of history that I participated in. It was kind of a forced march going back through the 60 years that I've been flying. And the fact that we went from propellers to hypersonic flight in that period of time is kind of awesome to me. But the funny thing about it was that when I went back through my archives and through my thoughts, I discovered there were some things that the statute of limitations had not yet expired. And so I thought maybe I better not mention those.
Those are the ones that we want to hear.
Mike did ask me, to talk about 15 minutes tonight, and I replied that in 15 minutes, how in the world can I tell everybody everything I know? And he suggested that I talk slowly. So I'll work on that. Two pilots were, pilots are funny folks. Two pilots were discussing popular family trends on sex and marriage and other values. And this one pilot, Jack, said to the other one, he said, I didn't sleep with my wife before we were married. Did you? And Mike says, I'm not sure. What was her maiden name? Well, I beat you up enough in those jokes, so okay. Dashing back quickly to the beginning of the creation, that is my creation, I was born in 1937 in Huntsville, Alabama, and spent the next 18 years there. A very nice little town, 12,000 people, great place to grow up. I was a very modest family. I'm the only person between my mom and dad that went to college, and there's some doubt that I graduated, but I did, and there's some record of that. I had a motorcycle, several of them, as a matter of fact, when I was growing up as a teenager. I used to deliver papers, and I would deliver them first from a bicycle until I got smarter and I got a motorcycle, and I started to then scatter papers all over Hell's Half Acres. I'd go roaring by, throwing papers this way and that way. And I developed in that very small town a reputation for being kind of a wild-ass Indian, and I was. And how I stayed out of the jail, I'm not sure, but I don't think I'd have managed it today. Fortunately, Huntsville was a nice and easy going place, and that's where I got started. The reason I go back to that is because that's also where I did the very first solo in 1957 in a PA-11, two-place, 85 horsepower, yellow Cub. Now, before that occurred, I was looking around, casting around for some place to go to college, and my parents didn't have the money to send me to college, and I firmly made the decision that I was going to go to college regardless. Probably what got me motivated in terms of service and Air Force was the fact that my dad was in World War II, and he was got out as a technical sergeant. He was in cryptology. I guess he was involved in decoding and encrypting messages in the 8th Air Force and B-17s. And he was over there for the duration of the war. And when I was a young man, a young child, that obviously had an effect on me, which got me interested in flying. So, casting around for a place to go to college, I was looking for scholarships. And lo and behold, somebody said, well, there's a new place out in Colorado that just opened up called the Air Force Academy. I didn't know anything about that. And so I thought, well, I'll give it a shot, since I've been turned down for several others. So lo and behold, I applied, and strangely enough, they selected me. And I became a member of the Air Force Academy's first class. We started in July of the 11th, 1955, at Lowry Air Force Base, the temporary quarters. We were there for 3 years before we moved to the final resting place of Colorado Springs. But strangely enough, on that very first day, 306 of us from all walks of life and ages assembled and were quickly formed into wearing the uniform properly and learned how to stand at attention and step off on our left foot. And they had a ceremony to open the Air Force Academy that day, and every type of airplane in the Air Force flew by while we stood there in awe and kind of stiff-necked, because that's the way they made us stand. But during that flyby, the Thunderbirds went by. This was in 1955, 2 years after they were formed here at Luke Air Force Base in 1953. Well, I said to myself, wouldn't that be something if I could somehow manage to graduate from this august place And maybe I could be the first Academy graduate that ever flew on the Thunderbirds. Well, that was something that went through my pea brain at the time. And lo and behold, that happened. 10 years later, I joined the Thunderbirds as the first Academy graduate to ever fly on the Thunderbirds as a demonstration team. And but there were some other things that transpired before that. For instance, the fact that I surprised an awful lot of people by graduating. And believe me, there was a lot of doubt over those 4 years, including myself. A memorable experience, a great experience at the Academy, still is. Totally different then than it is now, of course, but it was a difficult transition for this little 18-year-old Alabama Southern kid who kind of coasted through high school and didn't know his ankle from his elbow very much, but when they popped algebra and calculus and a few things like that on me, and finally they got to start talking about electricity and juice, we called it back then. We had to pass every course that we had. You couldn't average your classes out. You had to pass minimum score 90 or 70% on every course. Well, I did pretty well until my second year, and juice finally got me, and I missed it by a couple of points, getting 70, so I had to take what's called a turnout exam. So here and after, I don't know much about electricity, but I did pass the turnout exam, and they kept me on. That was the second pass. Okay, so I told you that I soloed in 1957. Well, that was after I was home for my first summer vacation that we had, and my uncle was flying airplanes back then, and he took me up for a ride and got me interested, and so I started taking lessons in that airplane and soloed. And then I went on, when I went back to the Academy, on my own recognizance and pay, I went to Stapleton Field, which was right across the road, not too far from Lowry, and took further training in various airplanes, and got my private license at Stapleton Field in 1958 in a Cessna 140 tail dragger that had a crosswind landing gear. Has anybody here ever flown a Cessna with a crosswind landing gear? Never heard of it. Well, that's probably to your benefit. Because it was designed so that when you could land in a crab, and the wheels would caster like this, and you'd go down the runway like a crab. Except that when the muffles got kind of loose, you'd be taxiing out, all of a sudden you'd taxi up. Very distracting. Well, I survived that and passed and got my license. So I also flew in the Air Force Academy. We had an aero club, and as cadets, we were allowed to join that aero club, and they had, among other things, an L5, Stinson L5, which I flew, and they had a T-34 or two. Well, lo and behold, I checked out in the T-34, and then when I did finally graduate, to everyone's surprise, and I was still pilot qualified because those of us that entered the Academy the first time had to meet pilot physical standards of eyesight, etc. And I still met that, and was fortunate enough to be able to go to pilot training. And guess what the first airplane I got to fly was? The T-34, which I chose because I wanted to go to one of the places we were converting at the time, the T-37s, the jets. But I wanted to fly in the bigger props, like we saw up here earlier. I wanted to fly the T-28. And there were only two bases at the time, civilian-run bases, that gave training in the T-28. And I chose one of them, Spence, Moultrie, Georgia, and went and flew the T-34 there, and then the T-28. Wonderful airplane. I love it to this day. It's one of the nicest handling planes you've ever flown. If you haven't flown it, you're also, next to being the tower operator, the tallest guy on the ramp, because that sucker sits up way up there. Well, then from there I went to Vance in the T-33, the T-Bird, the T-33 Shooting Star equivalent, and graduated, and was fortunate enough to stand high enough in my class to where back then merit counted. And it wasn't that everybody got an award. It was just you had to do well in military and academics and flying trainings and be recommended. And I was standing at the top of the class and was able to choose one of 6 fighter assignments, which is what I had wanted to do. And I went to F100 training right here at Luke. And then from there we topped off to Nellis. Well, following that assignment, went to Germany, Spangdahlem, Germany. And that was quite an exciting assignment for a fighter pilot, young fighter pilot at the time. Big challenges over there, lots of weather, low weather, lots of high bingo fuels we had to meet. And so I spent quite a while over there learning to fly at very low levels under all weather conditions, because the mission back then in F-100s was ground support for the Army units that were in Europe, and also we had a bigger, larger mission that went 24 hours, 7 days a week, year-round. It was called Nuclear Alert. Our fighters had a B-61 hydrogen bomb attached to the belly, and we set on alert 48 hours at a time, plus backup the other 5 days. And we had specific targets in East Germany that we used to have to go, and we could go at any time, day or night, any weather, because it was pretty much thought to be a one-way mission. And the funny thing about that was that, and later on, I transitioned at Spangdahlem into the F105, the Thunderchief 2. Great airplane. It was also designed for the same thing, except it carried the bomb internally in a bomb bay. A fighter with a bomb bay? Are you kidding me? Anyway, that's where we carried the damn thing. It went faster, had a radar that we could sort out the terrain, and we could fly terrain following with this radar in the weather. Well, man, this was really something in those days, and still is for that matter. But nevertheless, that was what we did. Talking about this nuclear thing, they had the idea that somebody back here in America had the idea that we could plan all these strikes, the bombers, the missiles that we had any back then, and all those fighters that would go charging in after the balloon went up, and that we might have some nuclear weapons going off on our route, and that might blind us. So they had the forethought to give everybody that set alert an eye patch, so that you were to take off and put this eye patch on. So that if you had a nuclear bomb go off that was a little bit mistimed, then this eye patch would at least preserve one eyesight. So you didn't take that off, switch it to the other eye, and continue on your mission, of course. So that was kind of laughed at, but nevertheless, it was for real, wasn't it, Ron? One of those things. Well, we also had the Cuban Missile Crisis back then, if you recall, and that was a big scare. John Kennedy was the president. And in Germany, we set alert 24/7 of all kinds. You'd go off a nuclear alert, and you'd go right onto a conventional alert pad, in which we were prepared to enter Berlin and defend our right to fly down the 3 corridors from East Germany into West Germany. Excuse me, West Germany into East Germany. And that was kind of a hard business. During that period of time, you might be of interested that I had the opportunity to fly since we transitioned to 105s. We flew F-100s, ferried them back from Germany back to the States, and picked up F-105s from the Republic up in Farmington, Rhode Island, or down in Farmington, Long Island. Or we picked them up at Mobile, down at Berkeley, and we'd ferry them back over to Germany. Well, we didn't have jet tankers in those days, and the fighters didn't have enough fuel to get across the Atlantic, so we had to have refueling. So we would take off from somewhere on the East Coast and head out in the dark, because we always had to go in the dark so we could land in the daylight back in Germany. And we would have to rendezvous with a damn tanker, and they started out being KB-50s, which had jet engines on the pods on. And these tankers only could get to about 18 to 20,000 feet, and we'd have to rendezvous with those suckers out in the middle of the Atlantic where there was nothing. There was no GPS, there were no VORs, there were no ADFs. It was called dead reckoning, with that thing right there. And we'd have to flight plans based on forecast winds and all that stuff, and hope like hell that we found this airplane out there, because if you didn't, you had just about enough fuel to go to some place, they thought, and get there with about 200 pounds of fuel and land safely. Well, this went on for years like that. we could, once we made radio contact with the tanker, we could indeed ask them to give us a steer. And we'd hold down the mic button, and they would somehow or other have an ADF and find us and say, okay, we think we see you, turn to such and such a heading. And we somehow managed to rendezvous these damn things. But that was exciting. One of those things. By the way, when I was there, the 3 years I was in Germany, I met my to-be wife. Later, didn't marry her then. Wasn't smart enough to marry her then. But 3 years later, or 4 years later, I got smart. Well, from there I came back and managed to get on selected to the Thunderbirds, which was a plan that I had some years ago. And again, don't know how I did that, but somebody mentioned that I know Ron Catton, and he was on the team at the time, and I got to know him well, and I think he probably helped get me on the team. But I was a fairly young captain with only less than 1,000 hours of fighter time, and they managed to select me for the team, and I flew the slot position with the number 4 position. Let me see, let's go through a couple of these slides real quick. That's my dad, before I continue the story. Next one. Oh, that's me at the academy after I passed my first class year, and I became an upperclassman, and I got to choose some people out. Go ahead. And while I was there, I was on the gymnastics team and managed to specialize in trampoline because we had such a small selection of students to pick from. We all had to specialize in something. And I was won the Rocky Mountain Amateur Athletic Union Championship in trampolines for 3 years in a row. And I guess that served me well because I can do aerobatics still to this day. And sure enough, I did graduate. That's not our graduation, but that just is the Air Force Academy graduation. And like I said, surprised a lot of people that I was down there cheering. Then this is a squadron at Spangdahlem that I was at. And the reason I show that picture was the 9th TAC Fighter Squadron, the Iron Knights it's called, you can see from the symbol. And in that august little group of people right there, the F-100 pilots and later F-105, there are 2 general officers in that group. There are 2 Medal of Honor winners in the Vietnam War, and there are several other Silver Star winners. And there is one of the guys here set the time to climb record when he was a test pilot at Edwards in the F-15. So just to say a little bit about the quality of the pilots that were in that very first squadron was pretty amazing to me, and I was honored to have been part of that. Next slide, please. There we are in the F-100. Next slide. And finally, we fleeted up to the queen of the fleet in those days. Boy, that sucker was fast. Wouldn't turn for shit, but it was a great flying airplane. I mean, that sucker would go like hell, and I've seen supersonic flight and military power on the deck in that airplane, right there. It was a great airplane. It had some wonderful stuff in it called INS, and it had a drift meter in it that would tell us what the drift was at the time as we were roaring along, and even gave us a rough estimate of our ground speed so we could make the nuclear TOT and not blind myself or somebody else at the time. Well, when I came back from over there, I went briefly to Eglin in the Tactical Air Warfare Center before I was picked to go to the Thunderbirds. And then when I went to the Thunderbirds, they picked me. One of the reasons was because the Thunderbirds were flying 105s at the time. But they didn't fly long because they were going into a show in California, and they pitched up to land, and one of the airplanes broke in two and killed the left wingman at the time. So they grounded the team for a short time. They went back into the F-100D, and so I transitioned back into the F-100D and flew that on the Thunderbirds. Next slide, please. And here we go. So one more. There we go. The 6 of us flying F-100Ds out of Nellis Air Force Base. Well, I got a few stories I'd like to relate about that, and I hope you find that of some interest. And by the way, I guess you're going to get a chance to pick on me for questions here later, huh? All right. Well, let me see. How am I doing? I've got any eyes drooping around here? No. We'll take a break.
No. Got another hour.
Okay. This particular team was made up of Paul Cotto was leading, Charlie Ham, who later became a 3-star, on the left wing. On the right wing was Buster McGee, who was a bachelor, and me, who was a bachelor, and I'm in the slot. And we had 2 solo pilots. that were with us at the time. That team flew in our first year 126 official air shows. We've never topped that record. The second year we flew nearly as many, so the total of about 245 official air shows we flew in 17 countries. We flew in both the U.S. and Central America and Europe. And one of our deployments in late May of 1965, we took off from Nellis. We carried 2 airplane spares with us, no spare pilots. There's 6 demonstration pilots, and you flew, or if you were sick and couldn't fly, we flew without you. Well, it was 5-ship, or whatever. But we had 2 spare airplanes, which occasionally came in handy, particularly the F100, because it was a little bit of a maintenance whore. Well, we went on one tour where we left Nellis and we went to put on the show at the Air Force Academy. And that was the first year that the Thunderbirds had flown at the Air Force Academy. Because I had made such a stink about it, I said, look, as long as we're here and I'm on the team, I said, I think we should make this an annual recurring show for the Thunderbirds at the Air Force Academy. And lo and behold, it did. Well, we were flying the first show up there. So we flew that show, then we went to Myrtle Beach and spent the night, got up early the next morning in those F100s and flew one of those across the Atlantic profiles I just described, and lo and behold, we managed to find the tankers, and there was more than one, and get fuel in the dark of night or in the middle of a thunderstorm, if need be, and make it all the way over to the Azores. On that trip, the trip lasted 32 days. We flew 33 official air shows in 13 countries before we got back to Nellis. So we did a lot of work back then. The team does not fly that much these days, but they still fly a lot of shows, but it's not anywhere near what we did then. I had a funny little experience, I'll tell you, and the reason I mention this is to talk about how communications can be a mystery at times. One of the things that we were required to do as we go to a show site was get in a small airplane and be flown around the show line and also perpendicular to the show line, where the flight leader or someone on the team that he designated, and I like to fly light airplanes, so he designated me often, would look around for uncharted or unseen obstacles like antennas and things sticking up that might not show on a map or something you know about, because we're flying pretty low and pretty fast. And you needed to have a survey flight, that's what we call it, survey flight. So this one day, we were in Barbados, a little island out in the Atlantic, Barbados. And the person that was going to fly was in a local British Aero Club out there, and he had a Cessna 172. Well, he had just gotten his private license. And I was designated to go fly this survey flight. Well, I said, okay. And about that time, the lead solo pilot said, hey, I need to go too. So he jumped in the back seat, and so the 3 of us took off. Now, Barbados is a small island, maybe at most 2 miles across. And the runway is at the south end of the place, and it goes east-west. So we took off to the east, circled up to the higher country. It might have been 200 feet above sea level on the north end. And I told the pilot to please turn south and go perpendicular to the runway and let down to about 100 feet. And we want to just see what's on the cross here, because in the bombers cross, the leader and I came perpendicular to the show line, and we want to make sure there was nothing there. So I'm sitting in the front seat of this damn 172 and looking around, and the guy goes up here and dutifully turns south and heads in the direction I wanted him to. And out there in front of me, I can see the ramp and the people gathering for the show, and there's all of our 8 airplanes lined up, and we're flying right over that. Well, I looked around and I thought, damn, he went awful low, close to that power line for a second. I said, well, I guess he knows what he's doing. I told him to go down, descend down to 100 feet. About 5 seconds later, I look up and we are flying into some power lines and telephone lines. And it was too late to do anything about it, so I said, oh, bam! Like the airplane hit these power lines. And I came back up, and I thought, what in the world happened? And I looked over, and this guy, who was British, he picked up the microphone, which is stored down here in the Cessna. He says, might I? And I looked at him like, Mayday my ass. And I grabbed the controls and jammed the throttle in and pulled the airplane back to keep us from crashing. And the airplane was going, but it was flying. There he is calling. That was a Mayday call. Well, here we go, and I didn't know what happened, but I kept the airplane in the air, and the next thing I see is we're headed right toward our airplanes. And I thought, oh dear, so I just pushed it down as far as I could, then I pulled it up so we bounced over it, and I went over the airplanes and over the runway, and then I dove off about a 70-foot cliff down to the water and did a 270 to get some energy back, did a 270 and came back around and landed. I thought, boy, that was close. And then I looked behind me and I saw, oh crap, I'm pulling about 200 feet of cable. Well, I wasn't worried, but all of a sudden it dawned on me that we went right across all those people. And I thought, man, I bet I whacked a few people with that thing whipping back there. Well, it turned out that there was a rock fence or a block fence just before we got to where the airplanes were parked. And as I pulled up, that cable hit that fence and bounced up in the air and went over everybody. Well, it turned out, a little bit of communications issue here. The gentleman thought that I said fly 100 feet, and so he got lined up where I wanted him to, and then he went on instruments. And he was flying down to 100 feet on his altimeter. Well, Barbados sits very low, and it was a little bit below that, not much. And we were coming from the steeper part down toward the runway. So he was flying on instruments, not looking out, because he dutifully was trying to follow what I told him to do, was fly at 100 feet on the altimeter. I didn't say anything about the altimeter, so, a little bit of communications issue there. So I learned a lesson from that. But I also found out, I was looking through some other things one time, that the quote was, don't drop the aircraft in order to fly the microphone. An airplane flies because the principle is discovered by Bernoulli, not Marconi. And Cessna pilots are often found in the wreckage with their hand on the microphone.
That's good.
Anyway, so much for that. Well, let me tell you another interesting story about perception in the Thunderbirds. We would travel across country either a 6-ship or a 7 or 8-ship, and this particular day we were coming out of Cleveland, an 8-ship going down to Eglin, Florida, so it was almost due south. We climbed up in the high clouds. We were at 39,000 feet, cruising along in this big, beautiful formation. And it was in the summer, and as we got down toward, and by the way, this is before a lot of radar, we got down toward Florida and contacted Jackson Center, and for some reason, they turned the flight 90 degrees to the west and said, start your letdown from 39,000 feet. Well, hit the clouds about a little below 39,000 feet and started down, but if anybody's ever flown in Florida on the summertime, they know that there's something called the Crestview Line. It's a series where the moist air from the Gulf comes on shore and builds up about 50 miles inland, right up over Crestview, which is just north of Eglin. And they have these towering thunderstorms that go up to thousands of feet. And they just kind of build a wall, east-west wall, up there north of right over Crestview. Well, here we came. And Jackson Center, again, no radar, turned us for some reason to go that way. So the flight leader turns and we start down. Well, in the F100, we had this big pitot tube sticking out front. I don't think you can see it on there. And it was heated by bleed air off the compressor. So we're going down, and I'm sitting there in the slot, and there's 2 other guys back there with me, plus the 5 other guys up on the wing and the leader. And I'm looking and I'm noticing that, God, we're getting faster and faster, and we're getting steeper and steeper, and it's getting rougher and rougher, and dark as hell, and lightning's going off, and we're bouncing around, and I'm talking about, I'm seeing some airplanes go up and down 50 feet on either side of it. And this is getting worse and getting better. And pretty soon the leader says, 2, you got it, I've got attitude indicator failure. Oh my, attitude indicator failure. So number 2 he takes the control and He looks at his instruments, because he's been flying off the leader. He looks at his instruments and says, oh my God, I'm in a 30-degree dive. I got attitude indicator too. Lead, I got one too. So he takes it back and he gives it to the left, to the right wingman. Meanwhile, we're going faster and faster. Pretty soon, Buster, my roommate, you and I are bachelors on the team, he's on the right wing. He says, I got it. And he looks at his instruments and he gets it right. He realizes what the hell's going on, and he turns our formation. We're all looking over at the right wing, you know, and he's turning. It's dark and lightning and thunder and crashing, and he turns us 90 degrees to the south, and poof, we come out of the side of the wall of those thunderstorms. And everybody looks around and says, God, we're all still here. Wasn't any paint taken off the airplanes? Nothing. Well, what happened? Well, leader enters the soup, starts down, torpedo system freezes up. When it freezes up, what does the airspeed indicator do? It kind of goes down, slowly starts winding down to 0. He keeps pushing the nose over, thinking he's got airspeed. He's losing airspeed. He keeps pushing the nose over, steeper and steeper. And we are damn near supersonic going down. And he thinks he's got attitude indicator failure. Well, that's perception. It happens. Partial panel. I mean, pilots in here that understand partial panel flying. You know? Well, that was what happened. Anyway, no damage, just a fun thing to do. One of the other things that you might be interested in is we put on a show out of Palmdale. Let's see what I got in this picture up there. There's old number 4. That tail, by the way, that's not paint, that's soot out of the leader's exhaust, and that's on my airplane. And I flew, and I'm the first guy to black the tail all the way to the bottom there. And every 200 hours we changed canopies on my airplane because my sight picture was looking straight down the leader's tailpipe, right up his tailpipe. Next slide, let me see what I've got. There's that infamous team sitting on the wing. And let's see, it turns out there, strangely enough, there's 1, 2, 3 general officers on that group right there, that main general in that group. Where was it? Oh, we're out to Palmdale, and this was in 1965, and the war just kicked off, and we had some combat going on over Vietnam, which I'm coming to in a minute. And Dr. Roman, who was the astronaut flight surgeon, he was collecting a bunch of data from pilots flying different missions, and he was trying to get some sense of stress versus responsibility while in the air. And he had put the tape like you do an EKG, only back then it was pretty rudimentary. You just were getting pulse rate and heart rate, and recorded in one of those big tape recorders, you know, about this big. So we taped this all up on the team. We stuck that thing in a map case, and we went out and flew a mission. He wanted to get some data. Well, a couple weeks later, he called us in. He said, well, I got some data and some I didn't get. He said, but I wanted to go over with each one of you what I found. And he went over and told about what your heart rate was and various concerning things. And he got to me and he said, we're a little bit dismayed here and we're not sure what we got. He said, before you ever started engines, your heart rate was 135. I said, okay. And he said, just before takeoff, it was still pretty high. I said, well, that's because I'm the guy that makes the first contact and first move, because in the slot position, we take off in fingertip. Here's me over here, the leader, and the 2 wingmen and me. When we take off in fingertip, I would then, as soon as we got airborne, I'd move under the number 3 pilot and move into the slot position on the team, so we could then quickly form the diamond and pull up and go away. So I said, it's not unusual that my heart rate would be that high. He said, okay. He said, but then he said, you know, we discovered that this is isometric now. We're not running the marathon here. I'm sitting in the cockpit doing essentially tense stuff. Just to show you how tense we were. And he said, you had peaks on your heart rate over 220. He said, we've never seen a heartbeat that fast before. He said, the highest heart rate we've ever seen was astronaut White when they did the first spacewalk, and they got back in the capsule, and they couldn't lock the capsule down again. And they did a lot of stringing to get it, and he said his heart rate went to 152. He said, yours was 220. I said, well, he must have been in a hell of a lot better shape than I am, and he didn't have beer last night. And he acknowledged that was pretty okay. But he said, well, that was interesting to us, and we don't know whether this data is correct or not, but that was interesting. He said, but the thing that really got our attention was that for 33 minutes, you averaged 182 beats per minute on your heart rate. And I said, well, I know that's not right. And he looked at me kind of funny, and he said, why is that? I said, well, because on the pull-out of the arrowhead loop, we nearly hit the ground, and my heart stopped. He didn't know how to take that. So anyway, we did repeat that, and sure enough, I did have those high heart rates, and to the best of my knowledge, I've set a medical record in terms of heart rate and endurance. And perhaps that's why I'm still at my ancient age here, not quite as old as some of you in here, but I have no heart issues. I take no drugs. I'm absolutely, amazingly, and fortunately, in pretty good health. That may have been part of it. Well, you know, pilots are always kind of suspicious of doctors. And there was a pilot that was being administered a psychological test one day, and the guy was showing him some Rorschach series. You know what those are? They blotted things that meant different, make anything out of it if you wanted to. Well, the pilot kept seeing, when the doctor would show him this, the pilot kept saying, well, that's a pornographic image. And finally, the doctor got kind of flustered with him. He said, well, why are you saying that? And the pilot said, well, hey, don't blame me. It's you showing me these dirty pictures. I knew some of the astronauts back then, too. And Pete Conrad one day was being examined, and he tells a story that the doctor gave him a blank sheet of paper. And he said, Pete, what do you see? Pete said, it's upside down. So I guess there's a little humor somewhere in there. Okay, how am I doing, Ron?
Perfect.
Here's my timer over here. Well, after the Thunderbirds, I took a short tour to the fighter weapons school to learn how to drop bombs again in the F-100, and then I went to Vietnam for the first time. I was sent in the F-100 since I was qualified in that airplane. And I went to Bien Hoa, which was not too far out of Saigon at the time. It's now known as Hanoi City, I believe, but it was Bien Hoa. We got F-100s, a lot of them. And I flew for a year out of Bien Hoa, and I flew 276 combat missions on that first tour. Well, I got there in July, and then in August, I scrambled off the alert pad, in which we would normally go in two-ship. And we carried 2 wing tanks, and then we had 4 armament stations, in which we usually carried 2 napalm cans and 2 bombs on our mission. And plus, we had 800 rounds of 20-millimeter ammunition. And we were scrambled on this particular troops in contact down toward Rockjaw, or down into the Four-Corps area, which was in the Mekong Delta, it was southwest of Saigon. And this was bad guy country. I mean, the VC down there were everywhere. And if you went down in Four-Corps, you very seldom, when anybody was rescued, and they didn't get out. They were captured and killed or imprisoned in a bamboo pit somewhere for years. Well, we went down, and the weather wasn't too good, because we had to coast out over the South China Sea and get let down over the water and turn around and come back in, coast in, because the ceiling was like 2,000 feet. And we had to get under that to find our forward air controller to lead us to the target and mark it so we could do the damage. Well, as we hit the coastline, headed inbound somewhere near Rockjaw, suddenly my engine goes, come on, and starts compressor stalling. Not sure what that's all about, but I said I don't like it. And remember, we're very heavy at this point, as we were about 200 miles away from base. So I turned 90 degrees away from my leader, which paralleled the shore a little bit, and I hit the panic button and jettisoned all my fuel and bombs and everything. And the engine was still banging and popping, and I was fiddling with it, trying to get it to run, and it wasn't doing very well. So I turned another 90 degrees so I'd get out over the water. I figured I'd have a better chance of surviving if I had to jump out. I'd jump out over the water. Well, it wasn't too long that indeed occurred. back in those days, we had a system, a backpack that we carry and wear, and when we were flying low, we had a hook, literally a little hook, that you would fasten to the D-ring of the parachute. And the reason that was fastened was so that the automatic, if you ejected, the system was supposed to work automatically so that the lap belt would blow open and you'd be kicked out of the seat, and then the seat would fall away, and then another timer would go off and it would open your parachute automatically. We hooked up this little thing called the zero delay lanyard because if you're low altitude, the system that would work was not designed for low altitude. It was designed to take another second or two to work. So they put this thing on there to allow the parachute to be pulled sooner. And I'll come back to that in just a second. But meanwhile, I'm trying to get this damn thing to run, and I'm out of the water, and we were supposed to have ejected by 2,000 feet if the airplane was not running. Well, here I am, I had the problem at 2,000 feet, so I've done a 180 now, so I'm somewhere well below 2,000 feet. But I'm still trying to get this thing to run. We have a couple of switches in there, and I would try, and then I would try to go to afterburner, and when I did, the planes would shoot about 300 feet out the nose, and I said, whoa, that's the wrong way. Supposed to be going that way. And it was banging and bopping around. Finally, it dawned on me that, you dumbass, it's time to jump out of this thing. Well, I looked up, and I'm going through 200 feet, and I'm about to hit the water, so I just pulled the nose up, reached down, ejected, pulled up the handle, the canopy goes off, I go up the rail, and the strangest sensation was that the airplane is falling away from me. Look at that. How about that? I don't get any sensation of going up at all. Just, oh, look at that airplane. Well, I'll be damned. And about that time, I thought I did a back somersault. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I've been trained to beat the seat, we used to call it, which meant I had to look down and see if the seat belt had opened so that it would snap me out of the seat and open my chute. So I looked down, well, it beat me. And I'm down like this, and about that time the parachute opens. And my head goes right down between my ankles and broke my back right here. Did a compression fracture on my back. Didn't feel it at the time, adrenaline was working. Hit the water, fortunately, instead of land. And I spent the next hour and a half waiting on helicopters and other people to finally come over and drag my silly butt out of the water. Well, at Bentui, where my roommate on the Thunderbirds, Buster was, they had an Air Force helicopter that had a hoist that would hoist you up out of there. But one of the Army dust-offs beat him there. And the dust-off pilot got a Distinguished Flying Cross if he rescued one of us idiots. So he hovers over me. Well, meanwhile, I'm in the water, and I didn't have my dinghy hooked up because I always thought that I was going to eject over the land, and if you didn't release that dinghy on the way down and get that thing out of here, there's a big package under your seat. You land it, and you fell, it would break your legs if you didn't have it deployed. So I said, you know, I'm not likely to jump out of the water, so I'm going to be able to jump it someplace. So I just never hooked the damn thing up. Well, where did I jump out? Over the water. But he did have LPUs, which are uninflated little water wings thing. So I hit the water and came up, and then you got to get rid of your parachute. Well, the training was reach down there and squeeze these two little things together, which would release the parachute, and it wouldn't get tangled up in it. So I'm come up, and the wind is there, and it's kind of dragging me across the water a little bit. So I'm pinching these things, and I couldn't get it to release. And I look down, and there's this wire. And I'm thinking, damn, somebody has wired my quick release together. Well, I forgot that the new quick releases had a big loop of wire that you stick your thumb in and pull it out. Well, I finally figured that out. Pulled the thing, chute went away, opened up my LPUs, and I'm sitting here bobbing around, kept my helmet on. And pretty soon, I see in the distance, not too far, here comes a sampan with about 3 guys paddling over to me. And I thought, I don't know who they are, but my wingman now had come over and found me in the water. All I had was my helmet sticking out of the water. And I made contact with him on the radio, which didn't work at first, but I shook all the water out of things in my vest here, shook all the water out of it. Finally got in contact with him. And I said, I don't know who those guys are, but how about going over and finding out and making a pass or two between us and them and turning around? Oh, we think they're friendly. Come on, come on. Look, I'm out here defenseless. Go out there and run them off. Well, we're not sure who they are. And so on guard channel, 243.0 in those days, everybody's listening, and that's what I'm communicating on. I say, when? If they're not standing at attention, waving the American flag, singing the battle hymn of the Republic, shoot the bastards! And that goes out over Guard Channel. And apparently in headquarters in 7th Air Force down in Saigon, it broke them up. It broke them up down there. Well, anyway, I pulled out my little 38 snub-nosed aircrew pistol we had at the time, and as they got closer and closer to me, I held this thing up so they could see it. Said, kept coming. Well, he finally made another pass or two. He didn't fire anything, and they did kind of turn around and not get me. Meanwhile, an Army helicopter comes over me, a dust-off, they call it. It comes a Huey. And he hovers over me and nearly drowns me because the downwash from the helicopter is ferocious. And here I'm sitting in the water with, up to here, and water's going up my nose. I'm thinking this is the first waterboarding. So fortunately, I took my visor and pulled it down on my nose. And I couldn't talk anymore, but I didn't get water up my nose. And he hovered around, and I look up at in the door. Here's this young enlisted man, had no shirt on, but he had the fatigue pants, and he had this uninflated LPUs. And he had a rope with a loop in it, and it was knotted about every 18 inches. And this poor guy jumps out of the helicopter into the water. And he goes down. And he comes up. Comes over, trying to swim over to me to hand me the rope. And he goes down. Comes up. Starts swimming for me again, trying to hand me the rope. I thought, I'm going to have to go save this poor guy. So I paddle over there, pull him up, open his LPUs, and inflate him. We can't talk, the noise of the helicopter's right here. So I said, so he throws the loop over his head and throws the other end up, and there are two guys in the back of that chopper. They spend the next 20 minutes trying to get him back in the chopper. Well, I'm sitting there getting cold soaked in the water. Well, they finally got his butt in there, so they came back at me again, held it down. They dropped the rope out this time, so I said, okay. Meanwhile, the Air Force chopper is orbiting, and I keep talking to my fax saying, please get this guy away from me so I can haul me up. Because they got a hoist that goes down, pulls you up, and hauls you away. No, he wouldn't leave. So I put the thing over my neck, or around my shoulders, and they started pulling. And I see these two guys struggling like hell in there. Well, can you imagine the rope around me, and you're pulling on it, and about every 18 inches is a big knot. They're pulling up over the edged floor of the helicopter, trying to get, and I'm down here trying to get me in. Well, every 18 inches, it would stop. Pulling and struggling and pulling and struggling. Pretty soon I'm looking up, still got my helmet on, and here comes a gun belt with a 45, smack, it hits me right in the head. They had pushed it out, it fell out, just goes in the way. Well, this went on for a while, and we finally got in the airplane and got rescued. And the helicopter took me to Rockjaw, dropped me off where the Air Force finally picked me up, and took me to Bentui, where my ex-roommate was. And he proceeded to promptly feed me some scotch. That's my family. We got married after I got off the Thunderbirds. Keep going here, we can catch up here. Went back to war. There I am in the F100 in Benoit. There I am in my Jeep. I was a Stanival pilot. Keep going. And there's my dad. Remember tapes, not cassettes, but real tapes? That's how we communicated. That's my dad. Next slide. And alert pad that I got scrambled off of. And here I am, deposited in Bentui, where Air Force 02 picks me up. And that's me, smart ass, that had just been rescued and probably had a half a bottle of Johnny Walker Red in my cup. Anyway, that's that story. Well, I came back from oh, by the way, while I was there, Tet, everybody remember Tet? That was a big offensive by the North Vietnamese that was supposed to have won the war. Well, I was there, and I discovered that one morning at 3:30 when I'm walking down the perimeter road to the squadron. And there was these three guys laying in the ditch over on that side with their guns pointed across the road over here to the fence. And I thought, what's that all about? Got down to the squadron, looked in, the lights are on. Nobody's there. So I thought, surely I'm not the first guy here at 4 o'clock in the morning. But I went in and started getting my personal equipment together for the mission that morning. And pretty soon I hear down the hall, and look, way down the hall there, there's a guy saying, come on. And they were all in the bomb shelter back there. That's when I learned that we were under attack. So I went and joined them in the bomb shelter. Didn't fly that mission, but during that rest of that morning and thing, the VC came on our base and tried to blow up some airplanes, and then had a big land battle right out there, right in front of the squadron, on the ramp, where they were bringing these satchel charges in, trying to blow up airplanes. Well, by noon, we had the thing somewhat under control, and they finally launched several of us, and we took off immediately, climbed up, turned around, and bombed the hell out of our home base, right off the end of the ramp, and then landed in the opposite direction. That was TED. We didn't win, but we bombed our own airfield. We also had an unusual situation back then. The F-100 was the workhorse of its day. It was the primary fighter, and it did a hell of a job through thousands and thousands of missions in Vietnam. Well, it was getting weak, and they had a structural problem of the wing carry-through box. And we were losing pilots thinking that they'd flown into the ground, when in fact the wing was breaking off of the airplane. We didn't know that at first. But we did find it out, and I actually witnessed one of our pilots, Clyde Carter, coming by after he'd flown some 200 plus missions and making a final pass over the squadron area. And he's flying along about 450 knots and just doing nothing. He just started nose up, and the wing pulls right over the airplane, rolls over, and he crashes and dies, and part of the airplane killed a couple people on our ramp. Well, that's when we realized we had a serious problem, and meanwhile, back on the States, Tony McPeak, one of the solo pilots in the Thunderbirds, pulled up to do the bomb burst break where the solo pilot screws up through the middle, and he gets about right here, and one of his wings breaks off, and the airplane goes this way, and he bails out, and everybody thinks that's part of the show. It was a hell of a bomb burst that day. I mean, Tony McPeak down in his parachute. Well, that's when we really decided, and we had something to prove it here, that by golly, the wings were failing. Well, because this airplane was the primary warfighter over there, we couldn't stop flying, and they couldn't get a fix ready. So we wound up having to go fly missions, knowing that the wings might break off at any time, and we continued to fly for months, not knowing when you walked out to the airplane that you were going to be able to come back, not because of enemy action, but because the damn wings broke off the airplane. That gave you a very funny feeling in the pit of your stomach, I'm here to tell you. Well, there was a lot of looking. They finally built a very thick, long strap milled out of solid aluminum, and they strapped this thing from one wing to the other across underneath the belly. It was a tension strap, and that's what fixed the airplane, because otherwise the damn things would break. Well, I came back from there and did a tour in the Pentagon, a couple of places, and wound up going to Homestead Air Force Base in 1972 as a squadron commander in F4s, F4Es. And then, no sooner than I get there, then I went back, was notified that my squadron was going back over to be Christmas help, as we called it, as a TDY squadron to help augment the units that were based in PACAF, still fighting the war. So we loaded up the squadron, and off we went back to Vietnam for the second time, only this time I was in Thailand. And I was going to fly in North Vietnam. Now, mind you, we'd had one of the Lyndon Johnson's famous bombing halts for a number of months, about 5 months. And this was the last one that they had. Well, the guys in my squadron, they were pilots and backseaters, WISOs we call them, weapons systems operators. All of us had been to war at least once. We had a tour over there, except for 1 or 2 new guys. Well, they put us in newbie school. We couldn't even find our way to the BX over there without somebody taking us around, treating us like idiots. Because they were the big boys. They'd been here, they were assigned. There were 2 students, people that worked at this place, and they knew what's going on. These new guys from TAC, they didn't know they were asking their elbow. Oh, okay. Well, we were there about five days, and pretty soon the DO, Deputy Operations, called all the squadron commanders in one evening at 6 o'clock. And he announced that we were going back to war the next morning. Oh, this was exciting. 5-6 months while the North Vietnamese reloaded with all the ammunition and SAMs they could come up with and fixed their MiGs. We were going to go back to war the next day. Oh, and he says, Hank, would you stay a little bit after us? Yes, sir. He said, we're going to use your airplanes and put the chaff on them, and I want you to be in the lead flight the next morning. It'll be the first flight of 4 over downtown Hanoi. Tomorrow morning. TOT is 7:30. Sir, I've never dropped chaff. That doesn't matter. It's very simple. We'll show you how. Yes, sir. So they went back and we configured the airplanes, and sure enough, the next morning we had F4s that were loaded. And the reason they took our airplanes is because we had internal gun. I thought, well, that's good. So they put 4 missiles on it, 2 heaters and 2 radars. They put big fuel tanks on, and the centerline tank, we had 6 700-pound stores that were pod bombs that would open up and chaff would come out. We had ECM pods on the wings, and we had 2 other big pods as big as napalm cans that were chaff generators. Air-driven turbine would go in and cut this chaff at certain lengths and certain frequency. It was all part of the radar, part of the ECM jamming along with our pods. The trick was, these 4 airplanes, we were flying in over the heavily defended territory that hadn't been rearmed, line abreast, 1,500 feet apart, 320 knots at 15,000 feet. Now, folks, if you've ever been in a high-density combat zone and you can't maneuver, you got to sit there and be in this pod formation so that it breaks up their radar, supposedly, along with our chaff. And we're laying a chaff corridor so that the fighters that day, and later on we did it at night, the B-52s could come in this chaff corridor, and hopefully their ground SAMs and all couldn't track them and wouldn't shoot them down as much. Worked great for the fighters, didn't work too well for the bomber. So that was the mission, and here we go, first day. Well, I was in shock, obviously, went home, wrote a letter. My wife said, please take care of my 2-year-old son, Todd. I'm not coming back, because I didn't figure there was going to be any way I'm going to come back from that mission. Well, obviously I did, but it was exciting. And probably one of the most awesome things I think I've ever seen is that when we took off just before sunup, joined up, and then we joined up on a tanker, and there was about an hour to 2 hour period of time where everybody, the whole strike force, orbited around, got their gas, changed tankers 3 or 4 times, orbited around, and finally, at the right time, all of a sudden, the tankers break off, and here goes this armada of airplanes north. It was the most awesome sight I think I've ever seen, because I was somewhere there, I could see what was going on in front of me. And we headed north for the war. Well, when we crossed over, we went right up over Tanugan steel plant south, and right over the Domer Bridge, and right over Hanoi, and right on up further north before we turned into Laos. Everything was going fine, except we're flying along here thinking this is great, and look down, and the ground, the sky below us, they were shooting at us, black, and it was black. An undercast below us, black with flak. But they were missing it because they were below us. I guess our ECM was working. The SAMs were running off on our alerting system, but they weren't firing at us for some reason, because they weren't tracking them. All of a sudden, here comes a big 21, right through the flight. He goes out in front of us, and he pulls the nose up like this, and going like this, because he didn't realize we were going so damn slow. And he overshot us. He's out there, and everybody goes, huh? And not one shot was fired before he went like that and split us out of the way, and we all went and just stunned because we couldn't believe he got there. And he did, and he didn't get hit, and he was surprised too. Well, we did turn and looked again, got in Laos and got back, and this went on for a while. And as you all probably know, we didn't lose a lot of fighters in that second thing, but we went nonstop, and this was one of the exciting things that the DO said that night. He said, folks, we're going back to war for 10 days and nights. There'll be no pause, there'll be no break, there'll be no rescues for 10 days and nights. If you get shot down, hide, don't come up on the radio until 10 days. That was the guidance. Because they were going to bomb, and get it done. And if we'd done what we did on December the 19th till January, first week in January, if we'd done that in 1965 or 66, we'd been out of that war then. But we didn't. Well, Nixon finally did it, and that's what got them to come back to the peace talks and to release our prisoners in February, which was a great day. And I was proud to be part of it. But that was one of the more exciting missions that I had at the time. Next slide. That's my first tour. I did finish, and you notice I have a Robin Olds mustache there that he copied it. And you can't tell from that black and white picture, but that sucker was flaming red. And don't ask me where the red mustache came from. By the way, during the entire course of the war, the F105, we started that war in middle of 65 with 495 of those F105s. By 1970, we had lost 390 of them. Many of them were POWs, many friends of ours. Well, back from that, I went to the War College in Pentagon, and then Seymour Johnson, the 4th Fighter Wing, in F4s again. I was the base commander for a year, and had a little ordeal there. And then I went down to MacDill and took command of the 56th Fighter Wing, which was training pilots in the F4 at MacDill in Tampa. The 56th Wing is now here at Luke because they moved it. And I spent 3 years down there and converted the wing to the F-16s while there. We had about 180 aircraft, and I converted it from F-4s to that, and I was flying the F-4 and the F-16 while there, which is kind of unusual. I was a colonel. Had a very interesting experience in the electric jet, which is what we call it was called the Fighting Falcon, but the airplane picked up the name of Viper from the guys, and later on is sometimes known as Lawn Dart, because single engine airplane, they were down and hit the ground, engine failure, and they got the nickname of Lawn Dart. Well, that applies to just about any fighter these days. Anyway, one day I'm taking off and I'm going to Nellis from Tampa, nonstop, by myself in the F-16. I had 3 fuel tanks on it. I had a little bit of a problem after takeoff. I got some electrical lights going on over here, and I thought, well, if we could reset those lights, which I did, and they went out, okay, anomaly with an electric jet. I kept going. I made it, climbing 180-degree turn. I'm up about 7,000 feet out over Tampa Bay. And all of a sudden, this airplane just goes, just like that, just pitches down. I'm thinking, this isn't going to work. I pulled the throttle idle like I've been trained to do, and I put out the speed brakes. Meanwhile, I'm pulling on the stick over on the other side to try to get the nose to come up. Well, all of a sudden, I'm thinking, it isn't going to work, so I'm going to eject. And I'm saying, no, I can push all the way under. I'll go all the way under this way. I'm the wing commander, and I didn't want to lose one of my airplanes. I didn't want to lose myself either. I got about here, and I thought, no, this is a bad idea. Let's eject. So I reached down like this to eject, and I'm still pulling on this right hand stick, and all of a sudden the airplane pulls up. There's the airport right over here, about 135. So I turned real quick, pushed the power back up about halfway, and landed. Well, it turns out that we had 2 other airplanes, F-16s, do a similar trick, and both pilots were killed. And here are the same things happened to me, but I bring the airplane back. Well, we impounded it and looked long and hard, and it turns out that there were 3 sequential failures in the electrical system in that airplane back in those days that had to all occur, think of the probability of that happening, had to all occur in sequence to cause the flight controls to lock up. And I can tell you the real reason for it, but it didn't, but it's not important. We did find it and fixed it and never had that problem again. So that was kind of an exciting time.
What's the real reason?
The standby generator, which is driven by an air turbine motor, got engaged, and it was running at full speed and didn't have a voltage regulator on it. And the flight control computer, the fly-by-wire system, had a built-in thing where it would shut down when it reached 42 volts. So it just shut itself off to protect itself. Well, that generator was over-voltaging it, and it said, well, I'm out of here, and shut the door. When it did, the flight controls went to a streamlined position that they thought was streamlined, but it pitches the airplane down. One of the fixes was, in addition to the electrical things, was they fixed the neutral position of the controls to where they would pitch the airplane down instead of down, because pilots didn't eject well going this way. Anyway, that was the story on that one. From there, I came out here to Luke and joined the spent almost 3 years out here at Luke. It was the 832nd Air Division back in 1982, late 82, early 83 when I got here. We had F-15s, had F-4s, and I had a squadron of F-5s at Willie. That was all under my command. And I then, while here, I also converted the F-4 wing, it was 2 wings, F-4 wing to F-16s again. So I became the F-16 converter, I guess. And I got the privilege of checking out the F-15 while I was here. And so I kind of let the F-4 go, and I stayed in the F-16. So I flew the F-15 in the morning, I flew the F-16 in the afternoon. And did what other duties I had to do as soon as I could so I could get back to another flying time. Anyway, I had a great time. I was the only general officer, I made general by then. I was the only general officer I know that was flying without a seeing eye captain in 2 different airplanes at the time, and I just didn't ask, I just did it. And my bosses were good enough to know that I was doing it and let me do it. Anyway, we went on for about 3 years here and had absolute 0 accidents. We were flying 200 airplanes a day, at least 200 sorties a day. And in the time I was here, I produced almost 1,000 F-4, F-16, and F-15 pilots, combat pilots. A great tour, did a lot of work in the base. I think I've had enough for tonight. I've got a few more things, but that's enough for tonight. I'll take your questions.
Okay. When you flew flight demo, did you fly nose trim up?
Down.
Down. So you always had positive pressure?
Yes. The jets have artificial springs in them that give you artificial feel because the flight controls are operated hydraulically due to the pressure flow. And one of the things you want to always be doing is be pulling on the stick, because you have a neutral position where it breaks out. The breakout forces are a little bit different. And in formation, you're constantly maneuvering, and you might have to ease off a little bit, so you didn't want to push and have an uncertain breakout force. So we would trim those down, and then I'm constantly holding pressure. So it was just a matter of pulling more pressure or releasing a little bit. It wasn't a neutral position. The wingman didn't have to use as much as I did in the slot for various reasons, but I had full nose down trim. That's why this arm is big, and this one is kind of limp.
Full nose down trim.
Full nose down trim.
Handicap.
Well, whatever you want to call it.
Your son was also a Thunderbird pilot, right?
My son in 2002-03 joined the team. They were flying F-16s, and he came out of the F-15E Strike Eagle and was selected to join the team and spent 3 years on it as a solo pilot. We were very proud of him, of course, and it surprised me because a lot of things have to line up. You have to graduate from college. He went to ASU, and that was also, like me, kind of amazing that he managed to pull that off. And then he was in ROTC, didn't go to the academy, so he had to get a flying slot, and there were only 1, and he got it that year. So he goes to pilot training. Then you got to be staying high enough in your class to get fighters, and he got that. Then he wanted to be in the Thunderbirds, and he applied for it, and damn if he didn't get it. So we are the only father and son who've been on a demonstration team in the history of the demonstration team. There's no other father-son who've been in the piloting demonstration business. And he became a wing commander and flew the F-35. He's now the director of the F-35 business in the Pentagon. And he still flies. He owns a Bonanza like me. And I checked him out. And when he was going to ASU, I checked him out in my Bonanza here. And he was doing a really good job, but I didn't want to tell him. So we'd come down and clean the bugs off the airplane, because bugs in Arizona have super glue for guts. So you got to get the damn things off before they solidify. Yeah. So we were cleaning the bugs off one day, and I said, "Son, you're doing pretty good." He said, but I said, I can't solo you just yet. He kind of looked at me disappointed, and he said, "Why is that, Dad?" I said, "Well, when you can fly between the bugs, I'll solo you." He looked at me like he didn't believe what I said. And we did get over that. Well, fast forward to last December. Now this was, mind you, in 1990 or so when this happened. I told you that. Fast forward to 2016, December. I'm in Washington, Virginia, visiting with them for Christmas. And he's giving me an instrument proficiency check in his Bonanza. I'm sitting in the left seat under the hood. He's over there being the IP in the right seat. And I'm flying, working my tail off and doing a great job, and flying good instruments and all that sort of stuff. And he says, "Dad, I don't think I'm going to be able to pass you." And you know what he said after that? "You're not doing a good job flying between the bugs, Dad." All right, I got some more things, but I'm going to skip it. But I do want to leave you with one thing here. There was an elderly fighter pilot that was stopped by police around 2 a.m., and that may be us going home tonight if we keep this up. And the policeman came up and asked him where he was going at this high rate of speed at night. And the fighter pilot, being keen-witted that he was, he says, "Well, sir," or probably slurred a little bit, "I'm on my way to a lecture about alcohol abuse and the effects it has on the human body, as well as smoking and staying out late." The officer says, "Really? Who is giving that lecture at this time of night?" And the man says, "That would be my wife." I appreciate your attention. I'm sorry I went on so long, but I've enjoyed talking to you, and if you've got any other questions.
Hey, do you have any update on Todd?
Yeah, he's going to be in the Pentagon for another year. He is, as I said, he's the director of the F-35 Integration Office for the Air Staff and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. He's not flying again, but he hopes to get back next year. Yes, sir.
I'm just wondering, when you came out of the clouds doing supersonic speed with broken window tubes, what altitude did you get out at?
We probably popped out around 18,000. Yeah. Go ahead and flip through it real quickly. I have just a couple more. There's the kid. Yeah, and there's nice R5s, flying some beautiful formation. Just keep flipping through them there. F4, dropping a few bombs. That's me at MacDill when I was a wing commander. And we flew F-16s, as I said. I also, after I left here, I did several other tours, but I flew the A-10, my last part of my career, and I was combat ready in the A-10 when I retired as a Major General in 1989. And we had a reunion of my class up in Denver at Lowry, and they had that thing up there, and I said, you know, I'm supposed to be able to fly the boxes that these things came in. Maybe I can fly this thing. So I got in it. We were having dinner on the floor of the museum there, and I pedaled that thing around and got as fast as I could go, and I never got airborne. I tried to do a roll, and it didn't come out so well. There's my plane. Next one. And my plane again. I fly with the Red Star guys a lot around here. Somebody has to provide a little bit of class to that group. I'm talking about the airplane. And there's my son and our two airplanes. That's my Bonanza down here in the lower left-hand corner with his F-16 in the back. Go ahead. And there he is in the F-35 when he was the wing commander of our first wing of F-35s in the Air Force down at Peglin. Next. And that's his family, St. Blaise. Next. He had the chance to come out here and fly with the P-38, and the F-35 is called the Lightning II. P-38 was the first Lightning. And there he is flying out here at Luke in a flyby. Next slide. And Ralph Kendry, who was an ace in P-38 in World War II, lived up in Cottonwood, and we went up there a couple of years ago, and from a picture that was taken, and go ahead, next slide. Ralph is the gentleman in blue there. He's 90-some years old right there. Go ahead. And he was very active, and he and my son signed his picture. Keep going. I think we're getting close. I still stay in touch with Thunderbirds and others. Next. And there I am at Oshkosh in the mighty airplane. That airplane is flyable, and for $5,000 you get a ride in it. And I have Sean Tucker and my son at Oshkosh, and there's the next one. Another gal, the gal in the middle is Melissa Pemberton. She's a world-class aerobatic champion, and I started her training. She's going to Embry-Riddle in Prescott, and I gave her her first year of aerobatic training, and she became a world champion. Next slide. And that's the typical salute, folks. Next slide, and this is it. Good night. Off to the sunset. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
This is what the